Hello, fellow truth seekers. This is Barbara Jean. Okay, more thoughts, more revelations, more, let's put it this way, more um, logic. Okay, we're using what we're really doing when we're reading the scriptures, and we're using our brains to logically put the pieces together, logically see the truth. Um, we're not using our emotions to cover up the truth. We're we are using our logical brain to put the pieces together in the right place so that we can get to the truth, the bottom line about what God really intends for us to understand. When He tells us the truth, our emotional makeup, our emotional woundedness, our sinful nature will get in the way from us being able to perceive something because our emotions uh, jam uh, jam the brain, jam the information from getting to the right spot. Years ago, I went to a kinesiologist. I was having all kinds of emotional issues, and I was having a real hard time. Dyslexia. I was hoping to go to college, but I knew that I would never make it in college if I couldn't read, a regular book without having to read one paragraph 10 times just to perceive what I was reading. I knew I was never going to make it in college. And it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent, as you all know. I'm not an unintelligent person. But what was happening was, and this is what happens to all of us, when we're under any kind of trauma, our brain goes through trauma, the left hemisphere, right hemisphere. When we are traumatized, what happens is the synapses can't um, connect from one hemisphere to the next, and therefore it jumbles up the information. And that's what God is trying to do. He's trying to unjumble the trauma, to heal the trauma in each of us, in order for us to get the information. And that's why you hear a lot of repetition from me. I know I repeat myself a lot, but I have to, because our brains are created in such a way. If we've been traumatized, and Satan knows this, he's traumatizing us through all the chaos and nonsense and wars and rumors of wars and fear mongering and all kids and vaccinations and flus and epidemics and blah 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 blah, and on the trauma is pounded on us and piled on us, so that we're living in so much fear and trauma, we can't perceive the truth, and it's very hard for us to to go to those places. Our minds reject it because we can't. It's so hard for us to believe that somebody that we put our trust and faith in, our governments, for instance, our teachers, our leaders, our doctors, are liars and trying to kill us or trying to. And I'm not saying all of them. I'm not saying all politicians or all leaders are bad people. But the reality is, we've all been traumatized. All of us have been traumatized, so that our brains are shutting down, and we're not able to receive the information. So that's just what I'm doing. I know I'm repeating myself, but I have to, because it takes a lot of repetition, and not just repetition, but showing you very deliberately the pieces fit this way. They don't fit the other way. When you have an all male God, the pieces don't fit. And that's what the trauma will try to say. No, 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 you're wrong. It's gotta fit, it's gotta fit. And we're trying to pound the pieces into place, and it just doesn't fit. But the trauma of all the things that our brains have gone through, our lives, and da 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 da, we have a really hard time receiving the right piece. But when you get the right piece in, suddenly it all makes sense. I have this favorite movie right now. I'm absolutely love this movie. And I know a lot of you are going to go, what? Can't love that movie. That movie is horrible. Well, actually, I really love this movie. And it's really hard for a lot of people to watch because of it's got a lot of occultic hidden messages and meanings um, in it. But I just love this movie. And the reason I love this movie is because it has opened my eyes to understanding some of the hidden things uh, that Satan has used, certain hidden things that, Satan, it's interesting thing about Hollywood. We all hate Hollywood, or at least a lot of people hate Hollywood because, they're all lies and propaganda. And you're right, there's a lot of bad stuff about Hollywood. But if you watch some things, not saying everything, but some things, it can really open your eyes to Satan's agenda. It really opens your eyes to the way things work and operate in the other side. In other words, we have to be as wise as a serpent, but gentle as doves. So anyway, there's a movie I just absolutely love right now, and I've really learned a lot of stuff from this movie. Now, I can't recommend it to someone who has a sensitive nature, sensitive person, or traumatized. It is a very difficult movie to watch because there's a lot of stuff in it that are pretty scary to think about. But there was a lot of truth in this movie, and it's the King Arthur, and I've mentioned it before, the King Arthur Legend of the Sword. Yes, it is an interesting movie. When you look at the hidden messages that are in this, and the obvious messages and the hidden messages, it is a really fascinating movie. I have learned a lot of things from watching this movie. There's a couple of interesting parts, and then so if you haven't seen it and you don't want to hear about it, I'm going to be talking about it because there was one part in the one of the quotes I really love in this film is when the prophetess, she's called the mage, is brought to finds King Arthur, or the Prince Arthur in this film, until he hasn't become king, but when he becomes, he's the prince, but he's the hidden prince. Nobody knows he's the prince until he pulls the sword. But he's given this sword. So spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear about it, don't listen to this part. He's given the sword that was given to his father by the mage, prophet Merlin. But this sword can only be pulled from the stone by his son Arthur, King Uther's son Arthur. Anyway, he pulls the sword, and this prophetess mage, I don't even know her name, says to him when Arthur is having a hard time controlling the sword, she says to him, did you see everything? Because when he holds the sword, he gets his vision. Arthur gets a vision of a very traumatic experience that he that he went through as a child. Okay, this is just going along with what I'm trying to say here. A very traumatic incident that happened to him as a young boy, 3-4 years old. Okay, and it traumatizes him so that he forgets who he is. But when he holds the sword, when he picks up the sword, it's too much for him, and he can't see it. He keeps closing his eyes to the reality and the truth of how dark and evil is. He doesn't want to face the truth of how evil is, and what it's done to his family. And so he closes his eyes. He looks away, and the mage says to him, he says, "Did you see everything you need to see when you went into the Darklands, when you hold the sword?" And he's not going to admit that he can't face what he saw, the trauma of his experience. And so she says, "Don't get me wrong." She says, "We all look away." I says, "I don't blame you for not looking. We all look away." She says, "But that's the difference between a man and a king, is that a king won't look away. You have to steel yourself through the trauma. You have to face the trauma. You have to face your fears. You have to face the incident that causes you so much stress and trauma to your brain and to your spirit. You have to face it in order to overcome it," basically. She didn't say that in the film, but this is what she's saying. In order to become the king you need to be, you have to face the truth. You have to experience your trauma and live through it and get through it and get to the other side of it. Because as long as you keep looking away from it, you are letting that trauma control you. You're letting that trauma um, um, have victory over your eventual success. You can't have success until you face what you don't want to see. What I'm trying to say. Okay? It's one of my favorite parts in the movie. Um, another part of the movie I really love is the part when Arthur is he's tried to he's come up with a plan in his own thinking, his own reasoning. This is what we're going to do, and he goes to take back the kingdom. And as he fails in his attempt, and one of his best friends is killed as a result of it, he he goes through. I can't stand. He blames the sword for the situation he's in. So he takes the sword and he throws it into the lake. And as it goes into the lake, the lady in the lake, there's a story about the lady in the lake, which I just love. I love this part. This is one of my favorite parts of the movie. The lady in the lake grabs the sword as it's falling through the lake. And Arthur's running through the forest. He's like he's trying to run from his destiny. He's trying to run from himself and run from his experience and run from the responsibility of the sword and what he needs to do to take back the kingdom from his evil uncle. But in his attempt to run, he falls into a pond, and the woman, the lady in the lake, grabs his hand. He's fallen into this pond, and his hand is in this pond. And as he's kneeling in the pond, and the lady in the lake, the spirit of the lady in the lake, grabs him by the hand and pulls him in. And therefore, actually, it's a symbol of baptism. He's baptized by the Spirit, the water and the Spirit in the lake. As she pulls him into this pond, his spirit goes into this water and he feels like he's drowning. He's dying to himself in this scene. He's dying to himself as the lady in the lake explains to him, if you don't take responsibility for, your calling and your destiny, this is what your uncle is going to do. And then she shows him the devastation that his uncle is going to mete out through his tyranny over all the land, just totally decimated. And then she shows him three women in the center of all this devastation, and one in the center is holding a dead baby. And I was like, oh, that is really profound. But that is also, like I said, one of those hidden things that it actually speaks about the Bible. This is what the tyranny of the Antichrist is going to do. It's going to kill everybody. He doesn't care. He will kill. His tyranny will destroy everyone in his wake. And so he says she pulls him in and says, basically he comes to himself and he starts to realize it's not just about him. It's not just about him. It's about his responsibility. He was called to be the king. And then she inflames this sword with fire. What does that remind you of? He will baptize you with fire. And this is what the sword, he clutches the sword or she clutches the sword and it flames up with fire in the water. And I think, wow, that's really profound. So then so anyway, he moves on. He comes up and he pulls the sword up out of the pond. He threw the sword into the lake, but because the lady in the lake gave him back the sword, he pulls it up and he gives this mighty roar like a lion. A lion's roar comes out of him. And he realizes his responsibility. And that's one of the parts I just love about this film. Another thing I found was really interesting about this film was the uncle. And I've talked about this before in one of my other videos. He is the personification of a Gibborim. He is the personification of a man who is so power hungry, and he kills his wife. And as you spoke about, a man's wife is the temple of his spirit. of his spirit. So when he kills his wife, he's in effect killing his spirit, his conscience. And you can see this happening in him. And at the beginning of the film, you're not sure why he's killing his wife, but he sacrifices his wife. Now, we don't understand what's happening, but you do now when you look at the scriptures and how a man is both male and female, and that the woman is the temple of his spirit, of that feminine energy. She becomes his temple of his consciousness, of his softness, of his gentleness, of his compassion, of his mercy. And when he kills his wife, this oh, I can't remember his name all of a sudden. I want to say, oh, and that's funny. I can't remember his name at the moment. Anyway, the uncle kills his wife. Arthur's uncle kills his wife. Now you understand. He's killing his spirit. He's killing his consciousness. He's killing his sensitive side to himself, his feminine energy. He's killing the temple, but he's killing the temple of his spirit. And in effect, what he's doing, he's killing his temple. He's killing his spirit. And then at the end of the film, he does the same thing. He wants more power. He's not powerful enough as far as he's concerned. He knows he's losing the spiritual battle going on between him and his nephew. So what does he do? He takes his virgin daughter and he sacrifices the last part of his spirit that's still alive in this world that she still has a part of his temple because she's a virgin daughter. She's not a married daughter. If she was a married daughter, then she would be the temple of another man's spirit. But she's still the temple part of it. She still has his spirit in him because she's the temple of his spirit. At the moment, she's what the last vestiges of his consciousness. And then he sacrifices her at the end. And then you can see what happened to him. You can see this process of him suddenly just losing every ounce of conscious of a humanity in him, and he becomes a beast, a literal beast in this film. Very profound. Another incident in this film that I really found was interesting is that there's a scene where the uncle is wanting to kill his nephew. He's now got his nephew under bondage. Arthur is under bondage, and Vortigern, Vortigern. I can't remember.